if he is who he claims to be. And the resurrection and his miracles manifestly demonstrate that it's true. Our field trip is quite conclusive. He is who he claims to be. Then that leads us to our last topic, and that is, what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about Jesus? You can either accept him or you can reject him. It's really kind of that easy. And what we call this is a confrontation with the issue of faith. I want to talk about the subject of faith because I know it sounds like I figured it all out and now I know all the answers and nobody else does. Well, no, I'm simply putting it together in a fashion, in a way that I'm thinking is like little beads on a string. This is true, this is true, this is true. And I'm pulling things together from many, many sources. I didn't invent all this, but I am a reader, I'm a researcher. And I put this discovery together so that we could see it all in 2 evenings, rather than having to spend a lifetime trying to figure this out. There are only 2 principles that we want to know. Faith always has an object. Over and over and over again, when I go out and talk to people, and they don't want me to pry, they don't want me to probe into their spiritual life in any way, you know what they'll say? I've got my faith. Over and over and over again, people across America, I've got my faith. What they don't understand is that's meaningless unless they tell me faith in what? They've got to tell me that I believe that chair will hold me up if I sit down. I believe my car will start and it's going to take me home this evening. On and on and on and on. Every time we say something about faith, we name what our faith is in. So you don't say, I believe in nothing. You say, I believe in something, whatever that something happens to be. Romans chapter 10. We must call on the Lord to be saved. To call, we must believe in him. To believe, we must hear about him. This is Romans chapter 10, verses 13 to 15. And to hear, someone must tell us, and to tell, they must be sent out. Go backwards now. You are sent out to do what? Well, to tell people information. Why? Well, so they can hear it. Why do they need to hear it? In order to have faith in what you told them and call upon the Lord to be saved. You see, the whole concept of evangelism and missions in not only Christianity but other religions is that people are running around telling others about something. And in Christianity's case, they're telling them about Jesus Christ. That's why Paul, 2 verses later, says, so faith comes from hearing. And hearing what? Well, concerning the word concerning Christ. So you'd have faith in Jesus Christ. That's the knowledge part of faith. The second principle is faith is only valid if its object is certain. If I come down here and I take you and well, before you got here, I knew they wouldn't sit in the front row. So I took this chair right here and I took out all the weld, I took out all the screws, I took out all the glue. That thing is just sitting there waiting for a touch and it's going to collapse. But I ask you, hey, do you believe the chair over here will hold you up if you come and sit on it? You look at it and you see lots of chairs and you see them all the same and everybody's sitting on it and is holding them up. And you say, well, sure. Do you really have faith that that chair will hold you up? Yeah. Do you sure you believe that? And by this time you're a little upset with me, you're a little irritated. So I said, okay, well, then what, would you do that for me? Would you just go ahead and sit in the chair? And of course you go to sit on it and it collapses and you come sprawled out on the floor. And so I come up to you and said, evidently you didn't have enough faith. Or was it that he put his faith in a faulty object? It's a faulty object. You see, his faith is only as good as the object you put it in. It's the object that determines the validity of faith, not how you feel, whether you feel strong, whether you feel weak, whether you feel dedicated, or whether you feel that you're sacrificing. None of those things, they're valuable, they're important, but they don't determine the validity of faith. The object for Christian faith is Jesus Christ. But the facts about Jesus must be true. He must be who he claims to be. for our faith in him to have any validity. If Jesus can be demonstrated to be a fraud, if he can be demonstrated that he died and he stayed dead, he's not resurrected, he is not alive today, he's not coming back again, but I believe in him anyway. Does that matter? No. That faith is worthless. It's invalid because you put it into a fraud. You put it into an object that can't deliver what you're believing that object for. But if there is no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ then must have been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain. Your faith also is vain. Your faith is worthless. You are still in your sins. Why is your faith worthless? Because you're putting it in an object, Jesus Christ, who's a fraud, who never rose from the dead at all, because people don't rise from the dead. So the truth about faith is this: can a person be saved by faith? You're afraid to answer, but I'll bet many of you's first response is, well, of course, because we say that all the time, don't we? You're saved by faith. No, religious faith can't save anybody. But the object of your faith, Jesus Christ, can. Now you might say that's splitting hairs. It's an important splitting. Lest you start depending upon the sincerity of your faith, the dedication you have, the sacrifice you're making. I don't care what is it that you're putting your trust in. That's going to determine for me whether or not your faith is valid. Can a faith assure you of life after death? Well, you know the answer, no. Your faith can't assure you of life after death unless that faith is in the object, Jesus Christ, who has demonstrated power and authority over death. Faith principle, then the key factor is the object. And I'll just go quickly here. Your faith is only as valid as its object. Now I want to apply that. I want to show you why that is extremely important. Which is correct. You cannot leave tonight unless you answer the question and get it right. Let me tell you what happens if the first one is true. That Jesus Christ is God because I believe it. Vishnu is God because I believe it. 1 million people believe that. Allah is God because I believe it. 1.5 billion people believe this. Does that make it true? Is that faith valid? How are you going to know? What are you going to look at? The object. Brahman is God because I believe it. Are all these, therefore, faiths equally valid? See, that's universalism. That's political correctness, which says, oh, you wouldn't want to tell somebody that their faith is not valid. That wouldn't be nice. That's not politically correct. And so you let them believe in something that doesn't exist? I'd call that not loving them. The only difference between a Muslim and a Hindu and a Buddhist and a Christian is the object of their faith. So the faith is knowledge of Jesus Christ, a valid faith, willing to trust him, and a response to follow him. If I took faith apart, that's kind of what it would break up into in 3 parts. Knowledge of Jesus Christ, a willingness to trust him with my life, and a response to follow him in obedience. Aha! Discovery number 7, Christian faith is valid because its object, Jesus Christ, is certain. Now, do you understand why we spent all last week and much of tonight demonstrating how we can know that the historical records are valid, how we can know that they're eyewitnesses, how we know that our leg is not being pulled when they write these things, and it didn't change over the years, and we went and looked at what Jesus said and what he did. We had to be sure of the object before we could talk about faith. This is a tough sell in a culture like ours, which has rejected the concept of absolutes, right? But isn't it true, though, that instead of accepting an absolute, what persons have to deal with, how are you going to deal with what I've done in Discoveries 3, 4, 5, and 6 before we got here? Are people going to simply shut their eyes to the eyewitness history? They will. But that's how I would go back at it. You can't ignore this unless you're dishonest.